Thank you for stopping by. Today, I'd like to take you into a reading that I did approximately 32 years ago for a man I'll call Steve. Steve had been trying to get a reading from me for approximately 3 months, but his work schedule and mine did not match. I should tell you that Steve got my number through a friend of a friend, and that's how it usually worked. So that particular afternoon, I was not busy, and Steve called, and I said, sure, come on over. So when Steve arrived and came into my front hallway, I knew exactly what had happened. So when he came into the kitchen and sat down, and I poured him a coffee, and he was quiet for a bit, probably 5 minutes. And I said to him, are you sure you don't want to postpone this? And he said, no, I need it today. I really need it today. And I said, okay. I said, do you want me to tell you everything? And he said, yes. So I told him that his son, Scotty, was standing behind him and that Scotty appreciated the Matchbox 11 of them that he had lined up in his casket for him. 9 cars and 2 trucks. One that was a blue Chevy and one that was a red Chevy. Now, at that point, Steve stood up and he left the room. He went outside onto my front porch and he stood there for around 5 minutes. So after about 5 minutes, I went outside and I said, would you like your shoes? Because he was sock feet. Or are you coming back in? What would you like to do? And he said, no, he wanted to continue with the reading. So he came back inside and we sat down and I told him that Scotty just wanted him to know how grateful that he was and that he was very sorry. He did not mean for this to happen and that it was an accident. At that point, Steve put his head in his hands and he didn't say anything and he started to cry. So I stopped and I said, I really don't think we should do this today. And he really wanted to do it. So we continued. So I spoke to Steve in regards to his son. His son had passed away recently. And it was just around a couple of days ago when his son died. He had an accident in his bedroom. Scotty was his son, and Scotty had come from school, and Scotty lived with his mom and his sister. Steve and his wife were separated at the time. So when Steve went over to the house to pick Scotty up, Lisa called Scotty, that's Scotty's mom, and Scotty didn't answer. He was upstairs. So she said, I'll go get him. He must be playing. So when she went upstairs, she didn't see him. And then she called him again and he still didn't answer. So she opened the closet and she found her son deceased. So I'm going to give you a little insight on what happened to Scotty. Scotty had come home from school and Scotty had been bullied for approximately 6 months. Now, his mom and dad, even though they were separated, were working on an amicable solution to raising their children together. They had a boy and a girl. Scotty's sister was a few years younger than he was, and she wasn't home at the time that this occurred. So Scotty, when he came home from school, had been playing in his room and he was practicing from scouts, his knots for scouts. And so he was practicing his knots for scouts and an accident happened in his closet and he subsequently passed away. So at this point, sitting in the kitchen, Steve wanted to know how I knew that. And I told him that Scotty had told me and that Scotty was standing behind him and that he was standing with a man and the man had on overalls. And I believe that he died of something to do with his chest. I said, I think it was cancer. And his name is Bill. And Steve looked at me and he stood up and he left the room. He got to the front door and he turned the knob and then he closed it and he came back and he sat down. So I said, all right, do you want me to continue? And he said, yes. And I said, Bill is with Scotty and Bill is your dad, right? And Steve said, yes. And I said, and they want you to know that Scotty's okay and that they're going to be fine. So, and Scotty at this point, the image of him that I received was him waving his hands at his father, trying to get him to listen. He wanted his father to understand that this was an accident and that he did not do this on purpose. And Steve said he understood that and that he didn't think that that's what had occurred. And Scotty said that he wanted his mom and dad to get back together and that he knew that they weren't going to, but he really wished that they would. So I spoke to Steve for approximately 45 minutes and then he had to leave. He had to go back to the funeral home. So a little insight to the funeral home. The first wake for Scotty was going to be that afternoon, and Steve had gone over to the funeral home prior to coming over to my home. Steve had been in with the funeral director and he went for a visitation privately with his son. Scotty and Steve were very close, and Steve had said that when Scotty would grow older that they would work on cars together, and he would always tell him, we're going to buy a truck, or we're going to buy two trucks, and we're going to get really good at this, and we're going to get Chevy trucks, and we're going to fix them. So Steve had put 9 Matchbox cars and 2 toy trucks that were Chevys. One was blue and one was red, in his son's casket lined up with him. Then the funeral director closed the casket and Steve left and came over to see me. So nobody else was there, and the visitation wasn't for, I think, about 2 hours at that time from when he came over to my house. So when Steve left and he got back to the funeral home for the first wake, his ex-wife, Lisa, was there, and his daughter, his in-laws, his mother, and her brother. So a few of the relatives were standing around in the room, and Steve asked them, would you guys mind leaving? I want to talk to Lisa alone. So Lisa's mom took Scotty's sister out of the room, and the funeral director, he asked him to stay with them. And the funeral director stayed in the room, and they closed the doors to this visitation room. So there was just Lisa and Steve and Scotty, now deceased, in his casket, and the funeral director in there. And Steve proceeded to tell her what the reading was about and what I had said and the message that I got from Scotty for them. So when Lisa sat down in the chair beside the casket and she said, I don't want to open it. I don't want to see. But after around 5 to 10 minutes, Steve said that she wanted to see. So the funeral director opened the casket and Lisa could see the Tonka toys in there. Now, Lisa knew that no one had been there and that there was no way I would have known that. So Lisa said she felt a sense of peace wash over her and happiness and love. And she touched her son's cheek and she kissed him goodbye, and they closed the casket and they stood there and they cried for a while. And you have to keep in mind these people were getting divorced, but they got along. So I don't know the particulars of that. I just know that they were being very adult about things. So they opened the doors and the wake continued. I heard from Steve a few days after that, and that's what he told me. And he said that it helped him to get through that day, and that every day he thought about the Matchbox cars and Scotty, and it lifted his spirits. He was working with a grief counselor, as was Lisa. And he said that Lisa was going to call me, but she wasn't ready yet. I told him that was okay. It didn't matter, just as long as she got the message. So a few weeks later, I'm going to say around 7 or 8, Lisa called me. I've never met her before. She told me who she was, and she thanked me for the message that I had given her from Scotty. She said it gave her a sense of peace that day. And when she got home, she said when she sat on the couch, she found a Matchbox car in the couch at the back. She could feel something when she sat down. She said she put it on the window and she felt like Scotty was with her at that point. Now, she said that she wasn't ready for a reading. And I said that was okay. You don't have to have a reading. Just the point was for you to get the message. And I'm glad that you got it. And she thanked me. And I told her how sorry I was for the loss of her son and that I can't imagine the grief that she was going through. She said the grief counselor was helping and that she really wanted to get a reading later on. And I said, whenever you're ready, but just take your time. It's not time for you yet. So I hung up and I had wished her well and I hung up. And it was around 9 months later when I got another call from Lisa. And she told me that she had cleared out Scotty's room and that she had the Tonka on the window in the kitchen, and that every day that gave her a sense of joy. And when she was feeling really down, when she picked it up, it lifted her spirits, and she couldn't understand why. And I said, I think it's because it's a connection to Scotty that you realize will always be there in those horrible last minutes when you stood in that room with him in his casket. And Scotty just wanted you to know that he didn't do this. It was an accident and that he was sorry and that he loved you. He knew he'd see you again. And it's funny because when he walked away, he said, I'll see you soon. And she said he always said that to her, I'll see you soon. I always found it strange. I never know when somebody's speaking to me like that. You know, that's their mannerism. So that's where it comes from. And when a dead person says, I'll see you soon, you think, well, is that other person going to die now? But I came to the understanding that this was just his mannerisms to talk that way. And as he walked away and they disappeared, Bill and Scotty, from my view, I knew that they had gone to an energy plane, and that's what I believe people go to. It's what I see. We're all made up of energies. So when Scotty left, he went to that energy plane with his grandfather. And so Lisa said that, she was taking it day by day and the grief counseling was helping. So that's the insight into how I do a reading. And so when a person comes in, sometimes it looks like a movie running behind them. It can either be of what's going to occur, what has occurred, or it can be a person standing behind. Some people will say a spirit, but this was their son standing behind, so I still call him a person. And I will take on their mannerisms. So if, say, they had a wristband on and they were doing this a lot and pushing it up in real life, they would be doing that when I was speaking, and I would take on that mannerism. Or if you were going like this, brushing your hair back all the time, I would take on that mannerism. So Steve phoned me approximately a year after that, and he asked me could he stop by. So he came by to see me, and we sat and we had a coffee, and he told me that he felt Scotty's presence quite often with him, and that it lifted his spirits. He said he was starting to work on a truck, and he called his truck Scotty. Um, I was really glad to see him and to see how far he'd progressed. I can't imagine losing a child, like I said before. So um, I told him to come by anytime, and periodically he would stop and say hi, and we would talk for a while, and it helped him. And that was over a period of probably 4 years that I seen him before I moved. I would like to say that bullying greatly affected Scotty, and that It had gone on for 6 months, and I really feel that there's never enough done in the schools when it comes to bullies. And my heart broke for Scotty because from the way that he articulated to me, he was intelligent, small for his age, but I could tell that he was above his classmates in intelligence, and I believe that's why he was picked on. So that's the reading of Scotty, and I hope to do a live soon, and I hope that you'll join me, and I look forward to seeing you. I thank you so much for your time, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you again. Thank you. Bye.